I stood there, hands trembling, as the shattered plates scattered across the kitchen floor like pieces of everything I used to be. Grace didn't flinch. "Get up and do something," she snapped, her voice slicing through the silence. My son said nothing. 2 years after losing my husband, after raising him alone, after teaching classrooms full of children to believe in themselves, I was spoken to like furniture that forgot how to stand. That night, I didn't argue. I just got up. And the world's been watching ever since. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence. It lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. I used to think silence was a kind of safety. The house was full of it that evening, just the tick of the kitchen clock and the hum of Grace's new stainless steel fridge. I stood beside her at the counter trying to help with dinner. She liked things done a certain way. I'd learned not to ask questions. Still, when she handed me a plate to set on the table, my fingers, stiff from years of arthritis and grief, slipped. The porcelain hit the tile with a shattering sound that seemed louder than thunder. A pause followed, small and sharp, like the world was holding its breath. Grace spun around. "Are you kidding me, Helen?" Her voice could cut glass. "You can't even hold a plate?" I bent down, heart thudding, trying to gather the pieces before she saw the tears stinging my eyes. "I'm sorry, I'll clean it up." She wasn't done. "You're always sorry. Maybe stop being sorry and do something for once." She glanced at Mark, who'd been half watching a football game from the couch. "Your mother needs to move. All she does is sit and mope like a ghost." Mark looked caught between us, the way he always did. His mouth opened, then shut. "Grace." "No, she needs to hear this," Grace pressed. "You can't live here for free and just fade away. Get up and do something, Helen." The words hit me harder than I expected. I'd buried my husband 2 years ago, buried half my will to live with him. And since then, I'd been floating through days like a shadow in my son's house. Maybe I had faded, but hearing it said out loud, so cleanly, so carelessly, burned something inside me awake. I didn't answer. I just kept gathering the shards. Each one glinted like a memory. The years I spent teaching second graders to read, the nights I cooked for my husband when he came home smelling of sawdust, the mornings I watered the flowers until his laugh echoed through the yard. I'd been useful once. I'd mattered. Now I was just sweeping pieces into my palm while Grace muttered about messes. When I rose, my knees cracked. I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in the oven door. Hair half gray, eyes dull. Behind me, Grace wiped the counter like I'd contaminated it. Mark finally stood. "Grace, that's enough." She gave him a look that froze him mid-sentence. "I'm just saying what you won't." He sighed and turned off the TV. "Let's all cool down." But the air was already scorched. Grace dropped the dish rag and stormed down the hall, muttering something about babysitting retirees. Her heels struck the wood like punctuation marks. Then the bedroom door slammed, shaking the picture frames. For a moment, the house was silent again, except for my own pulse in my ears. Mark rubbed the back of his neck. "She didn't mean it like that." I nodded, even though we both knew she did. "It's fine," I said quietly. "Go talk to her." He hesitated. "Mom?" I said go. My voice surprised me. Steady, not brittle. He left without another word. I turned back to the mess. A single shard had slipped under the table, a curved sliver with a painted blue rim. I held it up to the light before dropping it into the trash. My hands were trembling, but not from age this time, from anger. Real, living anger. the kind I hadn't felt since my husband died. By the time I finished mopping, the sky outside had gone deep indigo. Through the window, the mountains looked like sleeping giants, unmoved by our small dramas. I stood there a long while, listening to the house settle. Grace's muffled voice from the bedroom, Mark's low reply, the faint creak of the floor where he paced. I didn't belong here, not really. I'd been pretending I did because it was easier than starting over. That night in the guest room, I couldn't sleep. The bedsheets smelled faintly of detergent and someone else's life. Grace's words replayed like a broken record. Get up and do something. I stared at the ceiling until the shapes of the shadows blurred. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been sitting still too long, waiting for life to feel like mine again. Maybe grief had turned me into the ghost she saw. But ghosts don't get angry, and they don't make promises to themselves. I rolled onto my side and whispered into the dark. Maybe it's time I do. The heater kicked on, rattling softly. Somewhere inside me, something small and defiant stirred. The same quiet spark that once made me stand in front of a classroom full of children and believe I could change lives. I hadn't felt it in years. I didn't know what I'd do yet. But tomorrow, I'd start by getting up before anyone else, just to see what happened when I did. The morning came pale and cold, light slipping through the blinds like it wasn't sure it was welcome. I woke before anyone else, just like I'd promised myself. The house was still, the kind of quiet that follows a storm, uneasy but merciful. I slipped out of bed, pulled on my sweater, and made my way to the kitchen. The smell of coffee used to mean comfort. These days, it was just routine, but that morning, it felt like purpose. I ground the beans myself instead of using the pre-packaged pods Grace kept in the cabinet. The noise felt good, loud, alive. As the machine hissed, I looked around the kitchen that wasn't mine. Every surface gleamed, but it felt sterile, like a showroom instead of a home. A note on the counter in Grace's neat handwriting said, "Dentist at 9, pick up dry cleaning." No mention of me. There never was. I sat at the table, warming my hands around the mug, staring at the steam until it blurred my reflection in the window. I'd told myself last night I'd do something, but now that it was daylight, the idea felt foolish. What could I even do at 63 when I hadn't worked since my husband died? Still, I opened my old laptop. The screen took forever to wake up. Blinking like an old friend surprised I'd called. I typed in, "part-time jobs near me." The listings scrolled past. Barista, cashier, warehouse associate. Every one of them required things I no longer had. Quick hands, long hours, a body that didn't creak when I stood. I clicked a few links anyway, filled out a couple of forms, and stopped when the questions turned cruel. Graduated within the last 10 years? Willing to work weekends? Comfortable lifting 50 pounds? I closed the lid softly, as if not to wake something fragile inside me. When I stepped out to get groceries later, the air bit at my cheeks. October in Colorado. Springs always smelled like pine and distant snow. The grocery store was nearly empty, just a few early shoppers pushing carts through the aisles under fluorescent light. I wasn't looking for anything particular. Just milk, bread, a reason to be out of the house. That's when I saw it. A small handwritten flyer pinned to the community board near the exit, half covered by an ad for piano lessons. Volunteers needed, community kitchen, help feed local families, all ages welcome. Something in me tugged. It wasn't glamorous, but it was something. The words, "all ages welcome," felt like a hand extended toward me. Before I could talk myself out of it, I tore off one of the little tabs with a phone number. My heart beat faster than it should have for something so simple. Back in the car, I dialed. A woman answered on the second ring, her voice warm, brisk, unpretentious. Community kitchen. This is Lydia. Hi, I said, hesitating. I saw your flyer at Market Square. Are you still looking for volunteers? Always, she said, and I could hear laughter and clattering dishes behind her. Can you come by today? We're prepping for lunch service. I hesitated, looking at my reflection in the rearview mirror, the lines around my mouth, the soft slump of my shoulders. Yes, I said finally. I can come. The drive was only 10 minutes, but my nerves made it feel longer. The building was small, painted blue, tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop. A banner above the door read, "Serving Hope Daily." Inside, the air smelled of onions and tomato sauce, the kind of smell that clings to your clothes and makes you feel useful. Volunteers moved like clockwork, chopping, stirring, laughing. It was chaos, but the good kind. A woman in her 50s with her hair tied back in a bandana came over, wiping her hands on her apron. "You must be Helen," she said. "I'm Lydia. You're exactly who we need." Exactly who we need. No one had said that to me in years. She handed me an apron and pointed toward a crate of vegetables. "Think you can peel carrots?" I smiled before I could stop myself. I've peeled a few in my day. The work was simple but grounding. The rhythm of the knife against the board, the hum of chatter around me, the smell of simmering soup. It all filled a part of me I hadn't realized was starving. Lydia moved past once, resting a hand lightly on my shoulder. "You've got good hands. Steady. You'd be surprised how rare that is." For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. When I finally drove home, the sky was streaked with sunset, and I caught myself humming softly, hands smelling faintly of onions and hope. I parked quietly, slipped inside before anyone noticed. Grace was on the couch, typing furiously on her laptop. She didn't look up when she said, "You were gone all day." I only smiled, hanging my coat by the door. "Yes," I said softly. "I was." And for once, I didn't explain where I'd been. The second week, the rhythm of the kitchen started to feel like breathing. I showed up every morning at 9, sometimes earlier, before the others arrived. There was a comfort in unlocking the back door, flicking on the lights, and being greeted by the smell of onions from yesterday's batch of soup. It was messy and loud, but it was mine, a kind of order I hadn't felt in years. By the third day, Lydia stopped checking whether I'd show up. She'd just call out, "Morning, teacher," as I tied my apron. I didn't bother correcting her anymore. Maybe it was the way I chopped vegetables, still methodical, still careful to make the pieces even, like I was teaching the carrots how to behave. The volunteers came from all corners of town. College kids needing credit, retirees looking for purpose, single moms juggling 2 jobs but somehow finding an hour to help. We laughed over burned rolls, traded stories, shared aches. Nobody asked who I lived with or why I'd shown up alone. One afternoon, I noticed the storeroom was chaos. Supplies stacked wrong, invoices half-signed, food nearing expiration. The old teacher in me twitched. After lunch service, while everyone cleaned up, I took it upon myself to sort through the mess. Cans labeled, boxes stacked, clipboard in hand. It felt like waking up a part of my brain that had been dozing under dust. When Lydia walked in and saw me at the desk, she froze mid-step. "Well, I'll be damned," she said, grinning. "I've been meaning to fix that for weeks." Couldn't help myself, I said, half apologetic. Don't apologize. You just promoted yourself? How do you feel about handling the orders from now on? The words landed like a small miracle. Trusted. It wasn't a paycheck, but it was proof that I could still be counted on. The first week, I fumbled a few times. Over-ordered rice, undercounted flour. But Lydia never made me feel foolish. She'd just nudge me with that knowing smile. We'll get it right next time. And we did. The kitchen became my second heartbeat. I started keeping a notebook, jotting ideas for cheaper ingredients, better scheduling. People began asking me questions, small ones at first. Helen, where's the salt? Helen, how much garlic do we need for 40 servings? Then bigger ones. Helen, can you handle tomorrow's deliveries? I hadn't realized how much I'd missed being needed until the questions kept coming. Each day when I drove home, the air felt lighter, even when my body ached. My hands smelled of onions and soap, my clothes faintly of stew, but there was pride in the scent, like wearing proof of usefulness. One evening, I pulled into the driveway just as Grace came home from work. She was on her phone, still in her crisp blazer, voice clipped. Yes, just email me the report. No, don't wait for me. She hung up and turned, eyeing me as I stepped out of the car. Her nose wrinkled. God, you smell like onions. I smiled, unbothered. That's the smell of people eating, dear. Her jaw tightened. Lips pressed into that thin corporate smile she used like armor. Well, maybe change before dinner. The smell tends to linger. I'll keep that in mind, I said, brushing past her, my steps light. In the kitchen, I could hear her muttering to Mark in the living room. Your mom's different lately. Different how? He asked. Like she thinks she's important? I paused, hidden around the corner. Mark's voice softened. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Grace didn't answer, but when I entered the room, her eyes flicked up from her laptop, cold and assessing. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That was when I realized something subtle had shifted. Power, attention, maybe even respect. She didn't like it. Later that night, I sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing the kitchen apron, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the ghost Grace used to see. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes alive. There was a speck of flour in her hair and a streak of tomato sauce near her collar. I almost laughed. I didn't need anyone's permission to exist. Not anymore. From the hall, I heard Grace's laughter, sharp, practiced, for Mark's benefit. But underneath it, I caught something else. A note of unease. She could sense it too. I was changing. And change in this house was going to cause trouble. The first chill of November came early that year. The mountain wind slipped through every gap in the kitchen's old windows, rattling the pans like restless ghosts. We'd been scraping by for weeks, stretching ingredients, cutting portions thinner, praying donations would come through. But each morning, Lydia's face grew tighter. On Tuesday, she stood at the whiteboard, marker in hand, frowning at the numbers. We can't keep this up, Helen. The price of beans went up again. Flour's up. Everything's up. I was ladling soup behind her, the rhythm automatic now. We'll manage. Lydia shook her head. You can't pay rent on hope. We're short $3,000 a month. If something doesn't change, we'll have to close by Christmas. The words hit like a slap. Around us, the younger volunteers kept their heads down, chopping in silence, pretending not to hear. Closing wasn't just losing a kitchen, it was losing what little heartbeat this corner of town still had. When the shift ended, I stayed behind to scrub the counters. Lydia was still at the desk, tapping her pen against an empty donation jar. Her bandana had slipped, revealing the streaks of gray beneath. "You ever run a school fundraiser?" I asked, rinsing out the mop. "Once," she said dryly. "We made $72 and a migraine." I smiled faintly. "My husband used to run one every year. Chili cook-offs, bake sales, you name it. He won every local fair with that chili of his." Lydia looked up. "You think we can beat inflation with chili?" I met her eyes. "Watch us." She laughed, one short, incredulous burst, but there was light in it. "All right, teacher, let's see what you've got." By morning, we were all in. I wrote the recipe from memory on the back of a napkin, hands trembling slightly as I remembered his handwriting, his notes about spice and heat. He used to say the secret wasn't in the chili, it was in the people tasting it together. We printed flyers at the library, bright yellow with hand-drawn peppers around the border. "Community Chili Cook-Off. Feed the Future." Volunteers taped them on storefronts, lampposts, bus stops. Caleb from the local paper promised to mention it in the "What's Happening" column. Even the butcher on Main offered us a discount on beef for the cause. The kitchen buzzed again. Music played from someone's phone, spoons clattered, laughter returned. Lydia whistled as she chopped onions. "You might actually pull this off, Helen." "We might," I corrected, and she grinned. I spent the next few days buried in prep lists and spreadsheets, the same way I used to organize lesson plans. Methodical, hopeful. When the volunteers struggled, I found myself encouraging them, teaching little tricks, calming nerves. The more they looked to me, the more I felt myself standing taller. By Friday, the smell of spices filled every corner of the kitchen. Cumin, paprika, garlic, heat. I stirred a massive pot while Lydia checked donations at the door. We'd sold over 100 tickets already. The sound of chatter and clinking bowls poured in from the front hall like music. When I stepped outside to breathe, the cold air stung my cheeks. Across the street, I spotted Grace's car pulling into the lot of the cafe where she liked to meet clients. For a moment, our eyes met through the windshield. She gave me a polite nod, like she might to an acquaintance she couldn't quite place. Then she looked away. It didn't sting the way it once might have. I turned back toward the kitchen, my apron flapping in the wind. For the first time in years, I felt proud, not for surviving, but for doing. The event went better than anyone expected. Kids ran between tables with plastic bowls. People laughed with chili-stained smiles. Local musicians played near the door. The mayor even stopped by, tossing a 20 into the jar. "Smells like home," he said. That night, after everyone left and the last pot was scrubbed clean, I stood in the empty kitchen, watching the lights of the city shimmer through the frosted windows. Lydia locked the door and leaned against it, exhausted but glowing. "You did it," she said softly. I shook my head. "We did." But when she left, I lingered alone for a moment. From my purse, I pulled out the small photo I carried everywhere. My husband in his old apron, holding the fairground trophy, eyes crinkled with pride. The edges were worn, the image faded, but the warmth of it hadn't dulled. I traced his face with my thumb and whispered, "You'd like this." Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and slow, catching the streetlights in quiet sparks. It felt like a sign, not from heaven, not from memory, but from motion itself. And somewhere in that still night, the spark inside me burned steady. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the next fire, the one I didn't start, was already waiting. The Saturday of the cook-off dawned bright and bitterly cold, the kind of Colorado morning that made breath look like smoke. By 9, the parking lot outside the community center was already filling. Families in heavy coats, laughter echoing between the mountains. I'd been up since dawn, stirring the first vats of chili while Lydia bossed around the volunteers like a field general with a wooden spoon. Inside, the air was thick with heat and spice. Steam rose from the pots in shimmering waves. Someone had set up a makeshift stage for the local band, and the smell of cornbread mixed with the metallic twang of guitars. For once, no one looked tired. Lydia had that wild light in her eyes again. "Look at them," she said, sweeping her arm toward the crowd beyond the window. "We did this." I smiled, ladling another spoonful into a tasting bowl. "You mean we beat inflation with chili?" She laughed, that deep, real laugh that started in her stomach. "You're impossible." I didn't tell her I'd brought my husband's old apron from home, the faded one with the stitched words Ford's famous firehouse chili. It felt right to wear it again, his legacy simmering in the pot. My heartbeat sinking with the bubbling sauce. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was alive. "Ladies and gentlemen," someone called from the stage, "the cook-off fundraiser is officially open." Applause filled the room. People lined up, chatting, passing bills into the donation jar. Caleb from the paper winked at me over his camera. "Helen Ford," he said, "you've got the whole town talking." I laughed, cheeks flushed from the heat and the praise. But then, through the crowd, I saw something that made the spoon slip in my hand. Grace. Her designer coat, her precise hair, her heels sinking slightly into the snow outside the door. And beside her, Mark, hands jammed into his pockets, clearly dragged along. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd come to support me. Maybe the sight of her mother-in-law doing something meaningful had softened her. But the tight line of her mouth told another story. She pushed through the crowd, scanning the room like she was inspecting damage. "Mom?" Mark called, hesitant. I turned toward them, heart hammering. "Mark." "Grace." Grace's eyes landed on me, apron stained with chili, face flushed, hair escaping its clip. "This is what you do now?" she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Beg for money with soup?" The room went still. The clatter of spoons, the laughter, all of it evaporated. Even the music faltered. Lydia stepped forward, jaw set. "Excuse me?" Grace crossed her arms. "I'm sorry, but isn't this humiliating? Standing here cooking for strangers? You're supposed to retire, Helen, not whatever this is." Heat rushed to my face. For a heartbeat, I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor. Every insecurity I'd buried came roaring back. The widow, the burden, the woman who'd once dropped a plate and shattered her dignity along with it. Lydia's hand landed on my shoulder. "You don't have to listen to this," she whispered. But something inside me, the same spark that had driven me to pick up that flyer weeks ago, wouldn't let me stay small. I placed the ladle down gently and straightened. "No," I said quietly. "Let her talk." Grace blinked, thrown off. "You asked me to get up and do something," I said, my voice clear now. "I am?" The words hung there, sharp and steady. A ripple went through the crowd. Someone started clapping, soft at first, then louder, joined by others until the whole room was applauding. Grace's face reddened. "You're making a spectacle of yourself." Lydia stepped closer, chin high. "No, she's making a difference." Mark touched Grace's arm. "Let's go," he murmured. but she yanked free, glaring at me one last time before storming out, heels clicking like gunfire. Mark gave me a helpless, almost apologetic look before following her. The door shut behind them, and the applause slowly faded into murmurs. Lydia squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I nodded, even as my chest thudded painfully. "I will be." Caleb raised his camera again. "For the record," he said softly, "that was one hell of a moment." I forced a breath, reached for the ladle, and stirred the pot. The chili bubbled back to life, the scent of cumin and smoke filling the silence Grace had left behind. Outside, through the window, snow began to fall again, soft and indifferent. Inside, something steadier burned beneath my ribs. Humiliation had turned to fire. I smiled faintly, ladling another bowl. "Next," I called to the waiting line, but even as laughter returned, I knew nothing at home would be quiet tonight. Grace had seen me rise, and she would not let it stand. The next morning, I woke to the smell of burnt toast and the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. I wasn't expecting messages. Most mornings, the only notifications I got were weather alerts and pharmacy reminders. But that day, there were dozens. When I opened them, I froze. There was a photo. Me, ladle in hand, smiling at the fundraiser. Behind me, a banner half tilted. "Feed the Future." The caption read, "Local widow turns family recipe into hope." Caleb. He'd done it. The article was short, only a few paragraphs, but it was kind, honest. He wrote about how the kitchen had been weeks from closing, how a retired teacher had brought it back to life with a pot of chili and a quiet kind of courage. He called me the heart of Main Street. By noon, the comments were everywhere. People tagging friends, promising donations, sharing memories of my husband's chili from old fairs. Even the mayor's office reposted it. Lydia texted me a string of heart emojis followed by, "They're calling you Chili Queen." I laughed out loud. I hadn't laughed like that before breakfast in years. But that joy dulled the second I walked into the kitchen that afternoon and saw Caleb standing by the counter, his camera around his neck, looking sheepish. "Before you yell at me," he said, "it went kind of viral." "I don't even know how to yell about something like that," I admitted. "I don't have the words for it." He smiled. "Then just say you're okay with it." I thought about Grace's voice at the fundraiser, sharp and public. Then about the strangers online calling me brave, resourceful, inspiring. Me. "I think I am," I said finally. "Okay with it." Lydia burst in from the pantry, waving her phone like a torch. "Donations are pouring in. We just got $1,000 from that construction company on I-25. Caleb grinned. "See? Told you people love a comeback." I shook my head, dazed. "No. They love food." He leaned against the counter. "Maybe, but they love the person who makes it mean something more." By the end of the day, the kitchen felt different. Brighter. Busier. Volunteers kept popping in just to help. The phone rang non-stop with people asking how to contribute. Lydia had to make a spreadsheet to keep track of it all. At closing time, we stood in the quiet, surrounded by empty trays and the faint smell of chili lingering in the air. Lydia wrapped me in a hug that smelled like onions and cinnamon. "You did this," she murmured. I blinked back tears. Grace woke me up without meaning to. She leaned back, eyes soft. "Then let's thank her for her bad manners." I laughed again, shaking my head. That night, when I got home, the tension was thick enough to taste. Mark sat at the kitchen island, staring at his laptop. Grace was standing by the stove, wine glass in hand, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when she said, "You're trending." "I saw," I replied, hanging up my coat. Mark turned the screen toward me. Mom, you're all over the Gazette site and Facebook. People are calling you a hero. I smiled, embarrassed. Let's not go that far. He hesitated. I read Caleb's piece 3 times. I didn't realize how much you'd built. I'm proud of you. Grace's scoff cut through the air. Oh, please. It's a cute story, but they'll get bored next week. That's how these things work. Feel good for 5 minutes, then forgotten. I met her eyes. Maybe, but 5 minutes can still feed a lot of people. Her jaw tightened. Mark's hand closed around mine under the counter. Quick, subtle, full of guilt he couldn't name. After dinner, I retreated to my room. The glow from my phone screen painted the walls soft blue as I read more comments. Old students, neighbors I hadn't seen in years, even strangers saying things like, "You give me hope." I thought of the woman I'd been just a month ago, the one who couldn't even hold a plate without shaking, and felt a quiet kind of pride settle in my chest. Still, under that warmth was something sharper. Grace wouldn't take this quietly. She'd seen me humiliated, and she'd watched me rise. For someone like her, losing control wasn't something easily forgiven. I set the phone face down, turned off the lamp, and stared into the dark. For now, the world was clapping. But I knew the silence after applause always carried an echo of the next fight, and this time I was ready for it. The letter came folded in half, tucked under a bag of donated potatoes. Lydia almost threw it away with the trash. "Wait, what's that?" I asked, pointing as she crumpled the envelope. She smoothed it out and squinted. The official city seal gleamed in the corner, her brow furrowed. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." "What?" She handed it to me, laughing in disbelief. "The mayor's office wants us to cater the civic appreciation banquet next month." I blinked. "You mean the banquet? The one with city officials, business leaders?" "And a crowd of 500, Lydia finished, dropping onto a chair. "Helen, that's not a kitchen. That's a circus." I reread the letter twice. The words didn't change. We would be honored if the community kitchen would represent our town's spirit of service at this year's banquet. "Spirit of service," I murmured. "That's us." "That's suicide," Lydia said. "We'd need twice the staff, 3 times the food, and miracles in bulk." I felt the old teacher instinct kick in, the one that came alive when chaos hit the classroom. "We can do it," I said quietly. Lydia looked up at me, startled. "You're serious?" I nodded. "We've handled worse. Remember that day the soup line ran out and we improvised 20 meals out of leftover rice and canned beans? We've got the heart. We just need a plan." She sighed, rubbing her forehead. "You're insane, Helen Ford, completely insane." "Then you'd better help me pull it off." The next week was a blur of planning and panic. We drafted schedules, begged for donations, and rearranged the kitchen twice to fit the new equipment. Lydia barked orders like a general, but more and more, people turned to me for direction. It wasn't about ego, it was necessity. If this failed, the kitchen's fragile rebirth would crumble. Caleb stopped by one afternoon, camera in hand. "You know," he said, adjusting his lens as I stirred a vat of sauce, "every great story has its make-or-break moment. This might be yours." I wiped my hands on my apron, smiling. "Oh, don't you start with your headlines." He grinned. "I'm serious. You're building something bigger than food." I paused, glancing at the volunteers bustling around us. Maybe I'm just proving I still can. He lowered the camera, his expression softening. "Either way, people are watching and rooting for you." Word traveled fast. Too fast. 2 days later, I overheard Grace on a work call as I passed the living room. She was pacing, phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, that's my mother-in-law," she was saying. "She's running some kitchen project." "Oh, the banquet thing? Honestly, it's a disaster waiting to happen." She laughed lightly, the way people do when they want others to think they're above embarrassment. "She means well, but organization isn't her strong suit. You'll see." I froze in the hallway, heart thudding. Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were said so casually, like I was still some fragile embarrassment she had to manage. When she hung up, I stepped into the kitchen and quietly started making a list. Ingredients, volunteer shifts, tasks. Every item I wrote down became a small defiance. I didn't need her approval. I needed results. That night, after Mark went to bed, I stayed up late with Lydia on speakerphone, finalizing recipes. The kitchen table was buried under handwritten notes, grocery lists, and donation forms. I felt the fatigue deep in my bones but ignored it. Every detail mattered. The texture of the chili, the spice balance in the cornbread, even the layout of the serving stations. At midnight, Lydia yawned. "Go to sleep, woman. You're not 20. "I'll sleep when it's perfect," I said, smiling. When I finally crawled into bed, my hands ached from writing. But the ache was good. It meant I was alive, moving forward, not invisible. By the following week, word of the banquet collaboration had reached nearly everyone in town. Local restaurants offered ingredients. High school students volunteered for community credit. Even the fire station offered to lend warming trays. Everywhere I went, people stopped me to ask how preparations were going. Their faith felt heavy on my shoulders, but also thrilling. Lydia, still skeptical, shook her head one morning as I double-checked our inventory. "You really believe we can pull this off?" I looked around the humming kitchen, the volunteers laughing as they packed containers, the pots bubbling like they were part of some living heartbeat. "Yes," I said simply. "We already are." But later, when I stepped outside for air, the mountain wind hit colder than before. I could almost feel Grace's words following me, the certainty of my failure, whispered from miles away. And for the first time, I wondered not if I'd prove her wrong, but how much it would cost me to do it. By Friday night, the kitchen smelled like a battlefield of spices. Pots hissed, timers beeped, and volunteers moved in a blur of motion, half exhaustion, half adrenaline. I'd been on my feet since sunrise, organizing trays, double-checking lists, answering questions Lydia didn't even have time to ask. We were ready, or close enough to pretend we were. Then the phone rang. Lydia answered, pen still tucked behind her ear. "Community kitchen," she said, distracted. Her smile froze halfway through the greeting. "Wait, what do you mean truck's not coming?" My stomach dropped. She covered the receiver, eyes wide. "It's our main supplier, the produce guy. His delivery van broke down on the interstate. Half our vegetables are still 3 towns away." The words hit like ice water. The banquet was tomorrow. Without those ingredients, the menu was ruined. "Is there another truck?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Lydia shook her head. "They can't get it here until Monday." The noise in the kitchen slowed. The volunteers looked at us, waiting. Lydia's hands were trembling. "This is it, Helen. This is the part where we crash and burn." I took the phone gently from her hand. "We'll improvise." She blinked. "With what? We're out of peppers, beans, half the fresh herbs. We've got rice, potatoes, and more heart than anyone else in this town." I said it softly but firmly enough that a few volunteers straightened up. We'll make it work. Her laugh was short, disbelieving. You can't cook confidence? No, I said, grabbing a knife. But you can cook determination. By 10 o'clock, the kitchen was a storm of motion again. We tore through pantries, inventoried what we had left, and redrew the menu on the whiteboard. Fewer dishes, simpler recipes. No one complained. The younger volunteers followed my lead, hands moving fast but faces calm. Lydia hovered between awe and despair. I swear, she muttered, watching me dice onions like a woman possessed. You run on adrenaline and coffee. Mostly spite, I said with a grin, and the room laughed just enough to breathe again. Around midnight, as the last batch of bread baked, I stepped outside for air. The parking lot was empty, lit only by the orange streetlight and the reflection of snow drifting in slow spirals. My body ached, but my mind was too wired to rest. That's when I heard voices through the half-open window. Mark's voice, soft, uncertain, and Grace's sharper one slicing through. She's going to embarrass herself, Mark. You know she is. Grace. No, listen. The whole town's coming. If she messes this up, it reflects on us. The company, your job, everything. Do you want people laughing about your mom's charity circus? I leaned against the wall, heart thudding so loud I could barely hear the rest. Mark said something quieter, defensive maybe, but Grace's sigh drowned him out. She doesn't know when to quit. She's chasing validation that doesn't exist. The window shut. Silence followed. For a long minute, I stood there watching my breath rise and fade in the cold. My chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt since the night I dropped that plate. It wasn't anger. It was grief for the space between who she thought I was and who I was finally becoming. When I went back inside, Lydia was washing bowls, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. She took one look at my face and knew. She called again, didn't she? I didn't answer. She set the bowl down and wiped her hands on her apron before resting one on mine. Her palm was warm, steady. Don't let her steal your courage. Something in her voice, the fierce loyalty, the unspoken sisterhood of women who've been underestimated too many times, pulled me back from the edge. I nodded once. All right, I said, grabbing a spoon. Let's finish this. We cooked through the night. Coffee replaced blood in our veins. The radio played old country songs while we mashed potatoes and stirred gravy, filling trays with whatever we could create from scraps. The volunteers rallied around me, laughing, teasing, pushing through the fatigue together. By the time the clock hit 5, the first blush of dawn crept through the frosted windows. Steam drifted in soft ribbons over the counters, and the smell of roasted peppers and bread filled the air. Lydia slumped into a chair, eyes half closed. You did it, she murmured. We did, I corrected, though my hands were still moving, cleaning, checking. Outside, the world was quiet and pale. Snowlight brushed across the pots, turning the metal silver. I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes for just a second, feeling the warmth of the kitchen wrap around me, exhausted, proud, ready. But under the hum of the ovens and the heartbeat of the morning, I could feel something else building, the weight of what came next. The banquet. The moment everything would either hold or fall apart. And as the first sunbeam cut across the counter, I whispered to myself, let it rise. The morning of the banquet broke clear and cold, sunlight glinting off a crust of snow that hadn't melted overnight. My breath clouded in front of me as I carried the last box of serving trays to the truck. Lydia was already there, directing volunteers with military precision. For once, she didn't look anxious, just focused. "You sure you slept at all?" she asked as I climbed in beside her. "An hour," I said, smiling. "Maybe two if you count the time I stared at the ceiling and prayed the soup didn't curdle." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're a maniac." We pulled up to the Civic Center just after 9. From the outside, it looked enormous. Banners strung across the entrance, reporters setting up cameras, the mayor's aides rushing about with clipboards. The sight of it all made my stomach twist, but as soon as I stepped out, the cold hit my lungs and steadied me. Inside, the noise was like a living thing. Volunteers lined tables with steaming trays, servers rushed to refill bread baskets, and people were already queuing up, their voices echoing against the high ceiling. The scent of chili and cornbread filled the air, warm and heavy, cutting through the sterile smell of polished marble. Lydia caught my arm. "We did this," she whispered. I nodded, watching the line of people curl around the hall, teachers, firefighters, families I recognized from the kitchen. And at the far end, Caleb with his camera, catching every moment. By noon, it was chaos, the good kind. Laughter, clinking spoons, the scrape of chairs. Someone had set up a speaker and was playing bluegrass, and the mayor himself was making his way down the buffet line. I stood behind the serving table, ladle in hand, my apron spotless for once. When he reached me, he beamed. "Mrs. Ford, is this the famous chili I've been hearing about all week?" I almost laughed. "That depends who you've been talking to, Mayor." He took a bite, eyes widening. "Well, whoever said it was good didn't do it justice." He turned to the cameras nearby. "Ladies and gentlemen, this right here is what community tastes like." Applause broke out, scattered but warm. Lydia nudged me. "He said your name on live TV." I felt my face flush, but all I could think about was the kitchen back home, the laughter, the exhaustion, the long nights that led to this moment. I wished my husband could have seen it. Then, as the mayor moved on, a murmur rippled through the crowd near the doors. I turned just in time to see Grace walking in. She looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, coat perfectly tailored, hair immaculate, eyes scanning the room with that sharp mix of curiosity and judgment. Mark trailed behind her, looking uncomfortable, his hands shoved in his pockets. For a split second, our eyes met. Hers flicked over my apron, my hair, the crowd around me chanting for more chili. Then her expression faltered, just barely. But I saw it. Shock first, then something she tried to disguise as politeness. Mark leaned toward her, murmuring something I couldn't hear. She shook her head, lips tightening. But when the applause rose again, someone calling out, "Helen Ford for mayor!" Mark smiled faintly and said, clear enough for me to read his lips, "She did it without us." Grace's jaw twitched. She clapped, once, twice, mechanical, and then stopped, lowering her hands as if the sound itself betrayed her. Caleb approached me just then, camera raised. "Helen, can I get a quote? For the record?" I took a deep breath, the weight of the hall pressing in. The crowd quieted as I turned toward the small podium at the front. Lydia gave me a nod from the sidelines. I stepped up and gripped the microphone, my voice steadier than I felt. "When we started this kitchen, we were just trying to keep the lights on. I never imagined we'd be here today." I paused, scanning the faces, the volunteers, the families, Lydia, even Grace frozen at the back. But this town reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that we can fall, and fall hard, but we can also rise, together. Applause erupted again, echoing through the hall. Caleb's flash went off. Lydia was wiping her eyes with the edge of her apron. The mayor leaned toward a man in a suit nearby, an investor maybe, and whispered something. Moments later, the man approached me, business card in hand. "Mrs. Ford, we've been talking. If you're interested, we'd like to help you expand, create something permanent. A foundation, perhaps. The Helen Ford kitchen." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "That's generous." "It's deserved," he said. "You've built something that matters." I shook his hand, still dazed as the applause swelled again. At the edge of the room, Grace's face was pale, unreadable. She clapped this time, but her eyes were fixed on me, searching for something. Weakness, maybe. She didn't find it. When the event wound down, I stepped outside into the sharp winter air. The snow had melted into slush under the midday sun. Lydia joined me, slipping her arm through mine. "You realize what just happened in there?" she asked softly. I smiled, exhaling steam. "Yes," I said. "We changed everything." Inside, through the glass doors, Grace stood frozen for a moment longer before turning away, and as I watched her go, I knew this wasn't the end of our war. It was just the first battle I'd finally won. 2 weeks after the banquet, the kitchen still hummed with a new kind of energy, brighter, faster, like something had finally clicked into place. Donations doubled, volunteers kept showing up even on slow days, and people I'd never met dropped off boxes of food for the cause. But the moment that really changed everything came in the form of a text from Caleb. "You busy tomorrow morning?" I smiled at the screen before replying. "Depends why you're asking." His answer came with a winking emoji and a link. Podcast recording. Theme: resilience. You're the headline. The next morning, I walked into the small local radio studio wearing my cleanest cardigan and my husband's silver pendant tucked under my blouse. The space smelled like coffee and dust and faint, nervous energy. Caleb was already there, fiddling with the mic levels, grinning like a kid at Christmas. "You're sure about this?" I asked. "You kidding? The people already love you. They just haven't heard you yet." He gestured for me to sit. I slipped on the headphones, the world shrinking to the soft hum of static. A red light blinked. "Welcome back to the Colorado Heartbeat," Caleb said into the mic. "Today we're talking about second chances, with someone who's been quietly proving they exist." He turned to me. "Helen Ford, founder of the community kitchen, known around town as the Chilly Widow." I laughed under my breath. "I'm not sure that's the title I'd pick, but I suppose it fits." He smiled. "You've become a local symbol of resilience, Helen. What do you think started this whole transformation?" I took a slow breath, staring through the soundproof glass where Lydia waved from the hallway. "Honestly, it started with humiliation," I said. "Someone I love shouted at me once, told me to get up and do something. It hurt. But sometimes pain can be a strange kind of gift. It wakes you up." Caleb nodded softly. "And what did getting up look like?" "It looked like peeling onions until my eyes burned. It looked like learning how to matter again. At 63, that's not something people expect from you. They expect you to fade." The studio went quiet except for the low hum of the recording equipment. "I'd spent years thinking my usefulness died with my husband," I continued. "But I learned that we don't stop mattering just because we grow older. We stop mattering when we let the world convince us we do." Caleb smiled, voice low. That might be the quote of the year. We wrapped an hour later, my throat raw, but my heart light. Lydia met me in the lobby with 2 cups of coffee and a grin. "You nailed it. I just told the truth." "Yeah," she said. "That's what nailed it." By that evening, Caleb's episode had gone live. By morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages poured in from every direction. Women I'd taught decades ago, widows from neighboring towns, even men who admitted the story hit home. "You gave me courage," one comment read. "I'm 58 and starting over tomorrow," said another. Lydia cried when she read them. "You realize this is bigger than Chile now, right?" But the real shock came later that afternoon. I was ladling soup when Mark walked through the kitchen door. I hadn't seen him there in months. "Hey, Mom," he said quietly. I blinked. "You came during lunch rush?" Brave man. He smiled faintly. "I listened to the podcast." "Oh." I tried to sound casual, but my hands trembled on the ladle. He stepped closer, eyes wet. "I didn't know you felt invisible. I should have seen it sooner." Before I could answer, he wrapped his arms around me. The hug was awkward, warm, hesitant, full of years we hadn't bridged. But it was real. "It's never too late to stand up again," I whispered into his shoulder. He nodded, his voice cracking. "I know. You showed me." When he finally left, Lydia handed me a napkin to dab my eyes. "You're really getting good at this inspiring people thing." I laughed softly. "Maybe I'm just learning how to breathe again." That night, Grace came home later than usual. I was sitting on the couch, laptop open, scrolling through the comments. She paused in the doorway, wine glass in hand. Her eyes landed on the screen. My voice echoed faintly from a clip. "We don't stop mattering when we get old. We stop mattering when we believe we do." She froze, watching. The faint glow from the laptop flickered across her face. For the first time, she didn't speak, didn't sneer. Just stood there, her jaw tight, eyes unreadable. Then she turned away, retreating down the hall. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to follow. The silence she left behind wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, like space waiting to be built into something new. The news came on a Wednesday afternoon, folded between invoices and donation forms. Lydia burst through the kitchen door, waving a letter like it was a lottery ticket. "You're not going to believe this," she said, breathless. "Helen Ford, official nominee for the Colorado Springs Humanitarian Award." I froze mid-stir. "You're joking." She slapped the letter onto the counter. "Straight from the mayor's office. They're honoring people who've made a difference in the community. Guess who tops the list?" The volunteers erupted, clapping, cheering, someone shouting, "About time." I laughed, shaking my head. The sound felt strange, lighter than disbelief, heavier than pride. "Oh, Lydia," I said. "It's the kitchen, not me." She pointed her spoon at me. "Don't you dare downplay it. You built this from ashes. Now take the recognition like a grown woman." Caleb arrived not long after, camera slung over his shoulder. "Just heard the news," he said, grinning. "Told you this story had legs." He snapped a few pictures of the volunteers hugging me. I protested, but inside, something quiet bloomed. A mixture of awe and the uneasy awareness that life was no longer mine to hide. 2 days later, I learned how far the news had traveled. I was shelving canned goods when Lydia poked her head in. "Helen, brace yourself," she said, eyes twinkling. "Your daughter-in-law's social set just discovered humility." I frowned. "What are you talking about?" She held up her phone, scrolling through a local community group post. The headline read, "Local hero Helen Ford nominated for civic honor, son's family among guests." The comments below were a flood of congratulations. At the top, one woman had written, "Grace, you must be so proud of your mill. What an inspiration." "Oh dear," I murmured. "She's not going to like that." Lydia laughed. "Well, maybe she should learn to." That evening, the tension hit like a cold front. Grace came home early, her heels clicking sharp against the tile. She dropped her purse on the counter with a sound that made Mark flinch. "You've been busy," she said, voice sweet and cutting all at once. I looked up from the kitchen table, where I was writing thank you notes. "It's been a full week." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "My coworkers won't stop talking about you. Apparently, I'm related to the Mother Teresa of Main Street." "Grace," Mark began. She cut him off. "Do you have any idea how embarrassing that is? They all think I've been standing in your shadow while you play Saint of the Soup line." I closed my notebook slowly. "I didn't ask for attention." "No," she snapped. "You just basked in it." She took a step closer, the anger spilling out now, raw and sharp. "You made me look like the villain." I studied her face, the flush rising up her neck, the tremor in her hands. Underneath the anger there was something smaller, fear. "You did that all by yourself?" I said softly. Her breath caught. For a second I saw something flicker behind her eyes, guilt, maybe, or realization, but then she straightened, her voice icy again. "You think you're better than me now, don't you?" Before I could answer, Mark stood. His chair scraped hard against the floor. "Grace, stop." She turned on him, stunned. "Excuse me?" He stepped closer, jaw tight. "You've spent months tearing down the woman who raised me, and I've let you." "But not anymore." His voice wavered between anger and regret. "She's done more for this town in a year than most people do in a lifetime. Maybe you should ask yourself why that bothers you so much." The silence that followed was almost physical. Grace's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing before she found words. "You're choosing her over me?" "I'm choosing what's right," he said quietly. She stared at him, then at me, eyes glistening, mouth hard. "Enjoy your award," she hissed. "You've certainly earned your audience." Then she grabbed her coat and stormed out, the door slamming behind her so hard the windows rattled. Mark sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. "I didn't mean for it to come to this," he murmured. I reached across the table, resting my hand on his. "Neither did I." We sat there a long time, the only sound the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint echo of the door still swinging in its frame. Out the window, snow began to fall again, gentle, unhurried, as if the world didn't mind our chaos. And though part of me ached for the damage done, another part, the one Grace had spent months trying to crush, felt steady. Because for the first time in that house, the silence belonged to me. It started with an email that didn't look real. The subject line read, "Partnership Opportunity, Hearth and Harvest Foods." I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. But when I opened it, there it was. A neatly written message from a marketing executive in Denver. They'd seen the news coverage, the viral podcast, the photos from the banquet. They wanted to collaborate on a new product line, Helen Ford's Community Kitchen Chili. I read it 3 times before the words sank in. My hand shook so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. By the time Lydia walked in, I was still staring at the screen. "You look like someone just proposed," she said, pulling off her gloves. "In a way," I murmured, turning the laptop toward her. Her eyes widened. "Oh, Helen. They want to partner, distribute recipes, brand the story, nationwide." Lydia whistled. "That's not just a partnership. That's the big leagues." I nodded, but something in my stomach twisted. "They said they'd send someone from corporate next week to discuss contracts." She grinned, slapping my shoulder. "You could retire on this. Think of what it could do for the kitchen." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. That's what I'm afraid of. The following Monday, a woman in a navy suit arrived. Perfect hair, perfect teeth, the faint smell of mint and money. She introduced herself as Megan from Hearth and Harvest. "I've read all about you, Mrs. Ford," she said, shaking my hand. "Your story is exactly what America needs right now. Hope, resilience, heart. We want to bring that to dinner tables across the country." She slid glossy mock-ups across the counter. Labels with my name, my face, my husband's chili recipe. "Your foundation will get a cut of every sale," she said brightly. "You'll inspire millions. You'll be a brand." A brand. The word felt heavier than she made it sound. Lydia leaned against the sink, arms crossed. "What's the catch?" Megan's smile didn't waver. "No catch. Just standard licensing. We handle production, marketing, distribution. You keep telling your story. Everyone wins." But I noticed how she said "we handle," like the kitchen, the volunteers, the mess and sweat and humanity of it all, was a liability, not a heartbeat. After she left, Lydia turned to me. "So?" I didn't answer. My reflection stared back from the glossy mock-up, airbrushed, smiling, a stranger in my husband's apron. 3 days later, Grace showed up. It had been a week since she'd stormed out. She looked composed again, her makeup immaculate, voice soft and practiced. "Can I come in?" I hesitated, but nodded. She glanced around the kitchen, pretending to admire the rows of jars and spice racks. "You've done well for yourself, Helen. I saw the Hearth and Harvest announcement. Congratulations. It's not official yet." "Well, it should be." She set her purse down, smiling too easily. "You've got the story, they've got the resources. It's perfect." I studied her face, the way her eyes gleamed not with pride, but calculation. "Why do I get the feeling you've thought about this more than I have?" Grace laughed softly. "Because I have. My company does PR for brands like this all the time. I could help you. Contracts, negotiations, media strategy. We could do it together." Her tone was honeyed, but her eyes were sharp. This wasn't an olive branch. It was a takeover disguised as forgiveness. "Grace," I said slowly, "you think I can't handle it on my own." "I think," she said, stepping closer, "that you're good at small things. Community work, charity dinners. But this is bigger than you. It's business. Let me help you before you ruin it." For a moment, I almost softened. There was something human in her expression, something that almost looked like desperation. Then I heard my husband's voice in my head, years old but clear as ever. "Never trade your purpose for applause." Lydia's words echoed too, steady and fierce. "Don't let success be another cage." I straightened, meeting Grace's gaze. "I appreciate the offer, but no." Her eyes narrowed. "You're saying no to me, or to the deal?" "To both," I said. "This kitchen wasn't built for profit. It was built for people. And people don't need my face on a can to eat." The silence that followed was so sharp I could hear the hum of the fridge. Grace's jaw clenched. "You just threw away everything." I smiled gently. "No, I just protected what mattered." She grabbed her purse, her composure cracking for the first time. "You're a fool, Helen. The world doesn't reward humility. It forgets it." "Then I guess I'll risk being forgotten," I said quietly. When the door shut behind her, I exhaled, the tension leaving my body like air from a balloon. Lydia stepped out from the pantry, where she'd been pretending to stock shelves. "Remind me never to bet against you," she said. I smiled faintly. "Remind me never to doubt myself again." But as I turned back to the counter, the mock-up still sat there, my face printed on paper, smiling that too perfect smile. I stared at it for a long time before sliding it into the trash. And though I felt lighter, I couldn't shake the uneasy truth that some storms don't end when you close the door. They just change direction. The first sign of trouble came in a manila envelope. Lydia handed it to me one Tuesday morning, her usual spark dimmed. "Came by courier," she said. "From the foundation." I tore it open, expecting another round of routine grant paperwork. Instead, I found a single-page letter printed on heavy cream paper. "We regret to inform you that your current funding cycle has been suspended, effective immediately. Thank you for your service to the community." No signature, just an electronic stamp from the donor's office. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. The words didn't make sense, not after everything we'd built. "There has to be a mistake," I whispered. Lydia took the letter from my trembling hands, scanning it twice. "No reason given," she said, voice flat. "Just gone." The kitchen felt suddenly smaller, the hum of the refrigerators too loud. Around us, volunteers moved quietly, pretending not to notice. "How long can we last?" I asked. "Maybe a month, if we cut portions and skip the utilities bill," Lydia said, trying to sound calm. I nodded, though my mind was already spinning. A month. After that, the ovens would go cold. For the rest of the week, I called every contact I had, local businesses, the mayor's office, even Caleb's editor at the paper. No one knew anything. "Anonymous donor," they kept saying, probably just budget cuts. But something about it didn't feel random. Late Thursday night, while sorting receipts, I noticed something strange. The email that had confirmed our last grant deposit months ago had been forwarded to another address, Grace's work email. My blood went cold. I didn't want to believe it. But the timing, the tone, the sudden withdrawal right after I'd turned down the Hearth and Harvest deal, it fit too neatly. Grace had connections in PR, in corporate philanthropy. If she wanted to cut off my funding, she knew exactly how. For a long time, I just sat there, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. I thought about every argument we'd had, every cutting remark she'd thrown like a blade, and how each one had always been about control. This wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. Still, I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me beg. 2 weeks later, the kitchen's shelves were nearly bare. The volunteers whispered about closure. Lydia avoided my eyes when she balanced the books. Finally, I said what none of us wanted to hear. "We'll host one last meal." Her head snapped up. "What? Helen?" "No speeches, no donations, just food. One free meal for whoever needs it." She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we go out feeding people, the way we started." The morning of the farewell dinner, snow fell thick and wet, clinging to the windows in heavy flakes. Still, people came. Mothers with children, old men in worn coats, volunteers past and present. Lydia worked beside me, quiet but steady. Caleb set up his camera, capturing every smile. I wore my husband's apron again. The smell of simmering chili filled the air, the same recipe that had started everything. As the room filled, I spotted familiar faces. The mayor, a few local business owners, even one of the investors from the banquet. They must have heard. When the last bowl was served, Lydia tugged my sleeve. "You should say something." I shook my head. "Not today." But as I looked around the room, at the laughter, the steam, the gratitude, I realized I didn't need to speak. This was the speech, the food, the warmth, the community, the proof that we'd mattered. The mayor approached, taking in the scene. "You did this with no budget?" he asked quietly. "With heart," I said. "And heart's cheaper than it looks." He smiled, then turned to the investors. "This shouldn't end." Within minutes, phones were out, numbers exchanged, quiet deals made. By the time the tables were cleared, the mayor had shaken my hand. "Full reinstatement," he said. "And not just that. Expansion funds. You're too important to lose." Lydia gasped, covering her mouth. "Helen!" But I could only stand there, stunned. Not joy exactly. Something deeper. Relief threaded with vindication. Across the street, through the fogged window, I caught sight of a parked car. Grace sat inside, engine running, watching. For a heartbeat, our eyes met through the glass. Her face was pale, unreadable, until her jaw trembled and she turned away. It wasn't victory I felt in that moment. It was release, because I finally understood. She hadn't ruined me. She'd freed me from ever needing her approval again. The snow kept falling as I locked up that night, the neon open sign flickering in the window. The kitchen glowed like a lighthouse in the dark. We were open again, and this time, no one, not even Grace, could close us. The morning she came back, the kitchen was quiet. No volunteers yet, no clatter of pots or chatter of voices, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the soft scrape of my spoon against a mixing bowl. The snow outside had melted into gray slush, and light from the window fell across the counter like a gentle hand. I was stirring soup when I heard the door creak open. "Lydia?" I called, wiping my hands on my apron. But it wasn't Lydia. Grace stood in the doorway, wrapped in a pale coat that looked too thin for the cold. Her eyes were red-rimmed, makeup faintly smudged, hair pulled back like she hadn't bothered to fix it twice. For once, she looked human. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." She stepped inside, her heels clicking quietly against the tile. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I could hear the faint whistle of the heater, the steady tick of the wall clock. Finally, she said, "I drove here twice before. Just sat in the car. I didn't know what to say." "You found words now," I said gently. Grace's breath hitched. "I was cruel," she said. "I know that. I thought if I pushed you down, it would make me feel bigger, stronger." She shook her head, eyes filling again. "But it just made me small." I set the spoon down and leaned against the counter. "Sometimes strength isn't what we think it is." She looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "Then what is it?" "Sometimes," I said, "it means surrender." The words seemed to land somewhere deep in her. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down without resistance. After a moment, she glanced toward the counter. "Can I help?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Help?" She gestured toward the cutting board. "With the onions. I remember you said you needed them diced fine." For a second, I just stared at her. This woman who'd once sneered at my apron, who had turned my work into a weapon. Then I handed her a knife. Her hands trembled a little as she started. The slices weren't perfect, but they were careful, respectful. We worked in silence for a long while, the kind that doesn't demand words. Only the rhythm of the knife, the simmering pot, the soft hiss of healing too fragile to name. When she finished, she set the knife down and wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist. "No wonder your eyes burn," she said, trying to laugh. "They burn," I said softly, "because you stay long enough to feel it." She looked at me, a faint smile breaking through. You always did have a way of turning everything into a lesson. Occupational hazard. We shared the smallest laugh, uneven but real. The door opened again, and Mark stepped in, shaking snow from his jacket. He stopped short when he saw Grace standing beside me. "Oh," he said, blinking. "This is unexpected." Grace smiled weakly. "I was just helping your mother chop onions." Mark's eyes softened, relief flickering across his face. "That's a start." He walked over, pressing a hand to her shoulder, a gesture that held no anger, only exhaustion laced with hope. Then he looked at me. "Smells like the good kind of day." "It might be," I said, "if we let it." We sat down at one of the long tables with 3 bowls of chili still steaming. The first bite was quiet, reverent almost, the kind of silence that feels like breathing after holding it too long. Grace cleared her throat. "It's good," she murmured. "Better than I remembered." I smiled. "That's because you helped." She gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "I guess I did." The moment was fragile, like glass in sunlight, but it held. Mark reached for my hand, then hers, linking us together across the table. For once, the air between us wasn't heavy with what had been said or done. It was lighter. Possible. When the meal was over, Grace stood and began washing the dishes without being asked. I watched her hands. Steady now. Deliberate. Lydia arrived halfway through, pausing at the door, eyebrows raised. I only shook my head slightly. "Let her," I whispered. For the first time, Grace didn't look like she was fighting anyone. Not me. Not herself. As I turned off the lights that evening, the 3 of us stood in the doorway, watching the last of the snow melt under the street lamp. The kitchen smelled of chili and soap and something else. Peace, maybe. Grace looked over at me. "You're not invisible anymore," she said quietly. I met her eyes. "Neither are you." And for the first time, I believed it. Spring came early that year. The mountains still wore their white crowns, but the streets below were waking up. Flower boxes blooming, windows open to the sound of new beginnings. And so was the kitchen. By April, we weren't just surviving. We were expanding. What had started as a cramped, drafty backroom had grown into something larger, a network of kitchens across the county, all under one banner. The Ford Foundation for Community Meals. Lydia called it our revolution in aprons. The grand opening was set for a Saturday morning. There were balloons, folding chairs, even a rented stage that wobbled when you stepped too hard. I stood behind the ribbon, scissors trembling slightly in my hand. The smell of baked bread drifted through the air. Caleb was there, of course, camera rolling. "All right, Helen," he said from behind the lens. "One more for the history books. Just say something from the heart." I smiled. "That's the only kind I've got." Behind him, a crowd had gathered, volunteers, families, city officials, and strangers who'd once been hungry, but now came just to help feed others. In the front row, I spotted Mark, standing tall in his worn leather jacket, and beside him, Grace. She looked different now, softer somehow. No armor in her stance, no distance in her eyes. When she saw me glance her way, she gave a small, proud nod. I lifted the scissors and paused, the sound of the crowd quieting like a held breath. "This kitchen," I began, "was built on leftovers. Of food, of time, of people who thought they'd run out of both. But we proved that what's left can still feed others, and that no one's ever too old or too broken or too late to matter." Caleb zoomed in as I cut the ribbon. The crowd erupted into applause, but I barely heard it over the pulse in my ears. Lydia was crying openly, and someone started clapping off beat until the rhythm spread like laughter. Mark pushed through the crowd and wrapped me in a hug that felt like every lost year folding itself back together. "You did more than something, Mom," he whispered. "You changed everything." I held him tight, remembering the man who'd once stood frozen between me and his wife's anger. Now his voice was full of pride, not pity. "I just stood up," I said softly. "That's all." When I stepped back, Grace was waiting. She didn't rush forward, didn't make a show. She just extended her hand. "Congratulations," she said, voice steady. "You earned this." Her grip was firm, but warm. "So did you," I replied. "You helped me see what strength really looks like." Her eyes shimmered, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Don't give me too much credit." "Just enough," I said. Lydia came up behind us, laughing through tears. "If the two of you start crying again, I'm adding tissues to the pantry inventory." The crowd laughed, and for a moment, everything felt lighter than air. Caleb raised his camera again. "One last line for the closing shot, Helen. Something to remember this by." I looked around. The tables lined with fresh bread and soup, the kids chasing balloons, the sunlight catching on the brand new sign. My heart ached in the best possible way. I faced the camera, the crowd behind me, and spoke slowly, clearly. "No one's ever too old to matter." Applause swelled again, but this time it wasn't just for me. It was for every volunteer, every mother, every man who'd eaten a hot meal because someone refused to give up. Grace was clapping the hardest. As the noise settled and the cameras shut off, I found a quiet corner by the window. The sunlight spilled across the counter, the same way it had on that first morning months ago. The morning Grace's words had burned through me like a brand. I could still hear her voice, sharp and impatient, echoing across time. "Get up and do something, Helen." Back then, it had sounded like an insult. Now, it felt like a prophecy. I smiled, watching Lydia herd the volunteers toward the next pot of soup, Mark and Grace laughing together by the table, the world moving forward around me. And as the sound of life swelled, voices, footsteps, laughter, I whispered to myself, almost in awe. She shouted for me to get up and do something. So I did, and the world stood with me.